Hello and welcome to Work Organization, Labor and Globalization. My name is Dr Hristova and I'm the co-editor together with Ursula Hughes, the chief editor of the journal, of a special issue on academic labor and reorganization. Our special issue, Academic Workers in Crisis Organization in the Post-Pandemic University, was just published this spring, and we want to use the opportunity to introduce it together with two of the authors of the wonderful articles that are in it. So first, I would like to introduce the topic of the issue in a few words. The idea for this special issue emerged in conversations with Ursula and with other people working at universities during the pandemic, where when all of us were experiencing the frustration and anxiety of the very multifaceted processes that were taking place around the reorganization of how universities function, how academic labor is organized in different institutions around the world. One of the remarkable things that took shape quite prominently during this period was the way in which different technological tools, systems, and platforms were mobilized to enable a different form of teaching, to enable forms of monitoring, standardizing, and disposing of academic labor through, for instance, practices of using online lectures that would be recorded and then screened to students over the following months, possibly years, while the precarious workers that have recorded these lectures were not being paid for the way that their labor has been used. This is just one of the examples of the ways in which digital technology was mobilized in this period. And in our call for papers, we invited authors to think critically and to reflect about the ways in which digitalization and reorganization of labor are converging in the form of different institutional and state policies that affect academic workers. We received a number of different texts that are that I hope you enjoy to read in this issue, focusing on case studies from Italy, the United Kingdom, Canada, France. And most of the articles in this issue are testimonies of how academic institutions and state institutions responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how these responses have deepened existing precarization and casualization of academic work. We are talking today with two of the authors that look at two different aspects of the question of organizing. Thank you so much, Aline and Paul, for joining this conversation. We have gathered today on the occasion of the new special issue at the journal Work Organization, Labor and Globalization that looks at academic the crisis of academic labor triggered by developments in the technologies for outsourcing and for automation of labor, but also processes of reorganization around the pandemic, as well as how labor responded to that. We are here with two of the authors of articles in the special issue. Paul Stewart, who is a senior professor of sociology of work and employment at the Grenoble School of Management, and Aline Courtois, who is a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Bath. So I would like to ask you first to talk about the articles, the brilliant articles that you published in our issue. Aline, your article, co-authored with Maria Ivancheva, offers a very interesting analysis of how the adoption of different ed tech from the mass open online course platforms to the use of Zoom and Teams during COVID-19 dramatically restructured academic labor in what you refer to as the real subsumption of academic labor. Your article, however, presents quite a complex picture of these changes, showing how long-standing processes of precarization are a key part of this technological and political subsumption. And specifically, you point to the fragmentation of academic labor along class, gender, and race lines that is not entirely new, but leads to the particular privileging of an elite workforce that comes out benefiting more of the technological and structural changes in UK academia. And you also link the process of differential exploitation and precarization to the extractive practices of UK universities abroad, enabled through the affordances of remote teaching, but also the satellite campuses that are founded by UK universities in Asia, and quite a lot in Asia, actually. So would you like to speak more on these processes, especially in the context of your other work in this field?
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for organizing this event and the special issue, which I think is brilliant, even though, as I was saying earlier, unfortunately, I haven't had time to read all the articles, but I think together they really make for a very, very strong special issue on the topic. So also just to explain that again, I'm only second author for this piece. So Maria Ivancheva is the lead author, and she's the one who had all the big ideas for the article, but she can't make it today due to being on maternity leave. So so our article, I suppose, is the product of conversations I've had with Maria for quite a while. And it comes in part from a frustration, which is not only about a gap in the academic literature, but it's also about a blind spot, I'd say, in the work that trade unions might do, or other, collectives or forms of organization against casualization in higher education. And they seem to have quite a blind spot about the work of edtech companies and online program management and how it makes casualization worse. And we think that this blind spot comes in part from the fact that, and perhaps because academics as professionals, inverted commas, for want of a better word, feel that they are somehow threatened by all the changes and the way the job, say, is taken apart, is divided up into different things. So research only, teaching only, admin, and whatever. That there has been a tendency to focus on academics as people who work maybe within universities, okay, or other ways to kind of delimit that group, maybe to defend it, or or maybe just a lack of awareness that the borders of the group have become really, really blurry, and that is to do with casualization and all its different forms, including casualization via digitalization. Okay, so just to give a quick example of that. So in some universities, quite a few actually, international students, say, may actually sign up for a course, for a master's course with a given university, and they may not be aware that the people who put the course together are not academics employed by that university. Okay, and the people who will teach them, who will monitor their work, who will supervise their dissertation, may be employed by the university on whatever contract, okay, full-time or not, permanent or not, but there may also be people who are not employed by the university at all. They may be hired by something else, okay, so a corporation and a tech company who may be a big name that is known as a net tech firm. I'm thinking, Coursera, Pearson's, all those. It could be a publisher like Wiley and others who have started to diversify and get into that business as well. Or it could be, there are many such corporations do that. And that corporation can actually staff those courses, even though the course would still be master's in whatever university of whatever it is. And we don't know a lot about the working conditions of those people. There's no reason why they'd be better than what we unfortunately find in universities these days, in terms of things like bogus self-employment, hourly paid work, contracts that are designed in such a way that the work ends up being paid below minimum wage. Okay, as is often the case with hourly paid work, and work that is outsourced in all sorts of different ways. Roles that are relabeled in very, very creative ways. I think we could maybe a project would be a dictionary of all the different job titles you can have in academia these days and what they really mean. And there's kind of a blind spot about those people. I don't think trade unions that are based in higher education see it as their role to reach out to them or to include them in whatever fight is going on, despite the fact that that's something we try to focus on in another project I did based in Ireland with Teresa O'Keefe on long-term academic precarity, despite the fact that quite often people who end up working on those kind of margins, so not strictly in universities, they are fully qualified, they have PhDs, they have publications, they have had a go at an academic career, but in a way they end up being like fodder produced by universities for those list, you could say, further education, English language colleges, tech companies, and many more places, online colleges, private colleges, and that's it's not, what I'm saying is that it's not a separate workforce, really. It's not a separate workforce. It's not a separate profession. It's not different people. It's the same people. I mean, I was working for one of those things at some stage, and I could have maybe had no choice but stayed there. So those frontiers are very blurred, and it's not something that's properly acknowledged either in activism or academic writing. So that's what we wanted to focus on. So this said, the issue we have is that we do not have actual empirical data to write about this, and we have applied for funding to research it empirically numerous times unsuccessfully, unfortunately. So we haven't been able to actually collect data in a systematic way. So what we base the article on is what we have experienced, what we have heard, bits and pieces we have heard through research on something else, or research that maybe one of us conducted in conditions that means that it cannot be used while naming it. Okay, so another example of what casualization does. So this is what we have at the moment. And so the article starts with a vignette, and I read it again this morning, and I was like, oh my God, reads like a horror story, doesn't it? Um, but it is not a true story in the sense that, you know, it's made from bits and pieces from different stories, but everything in it is true. Okay, it's not just one place, one case, one course. It's different things that we've experienced. So the traffic light system is real. Okay, so that's a case where the course managers could monitor tutors and check that tutors had marked the students' work on time, or whether there was a delay or what was going on. So green, amber, and red. So that's something that is actually real. Not everywhere, but you know, it exists. And so we try and bring together all those different aspects of our experiences to try and paint a picture of what is happening. And it's important because I think that, so as I said earlier, some students may be enrolled on those programs without knowing who is teaching them, who has actually put the course together. And some staff can actually work in departments not really knowing their colleagues who work on those programs, which are advertised on the same webpage. And they may never have met them. They may not know them. And I mean, with casualization, sometimes that happens without the involvement of online program management companies. But it's quite, you know, it's worse in that case, because it means you kind of, you know, end up being kind of cut off as a work on those programs from the rest of the department. And so that's another aspect. So even colleagues, even people who work on those issues may not know that this is what is happening in their universities. And there are all sorts of implications for that. And I think there are some excellent articles in the special issue that talk about the algorithms and the violence of the algorithms. And those OPMs, I mean, that's how they function. That's what they bring almost, you know, to the teaching relationship. It's the brute force of algorithms to manage the process, every aspect of the process, in addition to financially, I mean, the extraction as well of fees and resources, intellectual resources, um, and the formatting of IDs in certain ways. So that's their role. So I think the special issue is I mean, has several articles on that which are really useful to think about the impact. But what we really wanted to talk about and what we think should be researched a lot more is yes, the impact on labor, on people who teach. Is it likely that then those processes of OPM taking over courses will make worse the trends that we already know about, such as teaching only roles, pastoral care roles being pushed down onto staff who are not only casualized, but are more likely to be women, are more likely to be racialized? Is it something that may happen? Will it completely avoid scrutiny because we're only looking at who is on our staff webpage in our department or university and ignoring those kind of, you know, peripheral colleagues that we never met? So this is one of the questions that we ask in the last section of the article, which is the vast research agenda that we think should be built on based on this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that there is a serious problem with the way that precarization and casualization is normalized in academia, because often whenever you try to start these conversations, there is always the reply that academic labor has always been in one way or another precarious, and you had to kind of sustain a long period of not having secure employment. But this is obviously very different along different lines of how the workforce is stratified right now, and really not homogeneous. But you touched upon issues of labor organizing, and I want to use this as a segue to Poe's article with Heather Connolly, because I think that the two articles of yours represent two different sides of the question of organizing. On one hand, how does the institution organize labor and labor processes in a way that enhances casualization and precarization? And the other question is the very important issue of how can labor organize to resist these dynamics? And Paul you have long focused on issues of labor organizing and unionization in your work. And your article with Heather Connolly analyzes the actions taken by university unions in France and in the UK in response to the pandemic, and to government and institutional measures that affected the conditions of labor. And you compare it to very different contexts and provide an excellent historical analysis of how these two developed in the last few decades. So on the one hand, the French context, which is heavily centralized with state overview and regulation of labor relations, and the UK case, which is more decentralized and reliant on bargaining between workers and capital. But what I found really interesting is that paradoxically you show that the French regulatory context was detrimental in essentially disempowering local unions by luring them into accepting temporary concessions that they could never gain back.
Yeah.
So would you like to reflect a little bit on what this says about the development of unionism in academia and the path forward?
Okay, thank you, Svetlana. It's and thank you for organizing this. Normally, you know, when you write a paper, you then I had to quickly then remind myself what it was about because we're not so you know don't have the opportunity often to talk about it and kind of develop it a little bit. I think because there are things I want to say about what's happened subsequently that are germane to this and also to what Aline has been talking about. I think Heather is more in the area of industrial relations, employment relations. They're both sociologists, and I've been working for a long time in casualization and the organisation of labour. And through a network involved in a platform, critical labour studies, where we've been working with people outside, outside the academy really. And I was always, intrigued. In the case of France, I was a labour negotiator when I was at Strathclyde University in Scotland for many years, and as you both know, working in Britain, one of the frustrations was always that there was never any kind of formal institutional. It's got increasingly difficult with the Tory governments. No formal institutional platform that you could use to bargain with the employer. Because of the nature of industrial relations in Britain, voluntarism and informality, of course. And so, and you've seen, I mean, I've been keeping my eye, obviously, on what's been happening in British universities with the dispute around pensions, and now it's going into things around work and employment and repression, gender violence, and the whole way, it's kind of everything has now come out because, because the nature of the institution and society more broadly. But, and so when I came to France, I thought it would be very interesting to be in a country where ostensibly there are these formal institutionalized patterns of workplace protections. And I came here into 2017 first, but then I got the job in Grenoble, and So I was what I one of the first things I did was I got elected onto the CSO, which is used to be since 2019. There's been a change in labour legislation so that any organisation with more than 11 people has to have a CSA. It's committee it's committee sociale et économique, and it's I suppose it takes place in the Works Council, but it brought together consolidated number of features of the employment and the bargaining relationship in France. So I thought if I was on the CSA here in Grenoble, quite interesting to sort of see how it actually worked, how much protection it offered, and of course I was actually appalled because I realized very quickly that one things that Macron did in introducing, at first, because I first thought that's amazing, an organization of 11 people, kind of a works council, and can bargain with the manager, with the employer. That must be really, really strong. Of course, what it did was what it was doing was watering down, weakening, and what the works council could do, but actually reducing the scope for negotiation and also for bargaining, so that the works councils don't actually, the CSA doesn't actually bargain. It's simply, it's consultative, and the bargaining, uh, actors come from the trade unions, and of course, therefore, it depends how strong the trade unions are. And we know in France, of course, trade union membership is very low, and so it depends very much on how strong the trade unions are. And here it's the CFDT, which is the Confederation Française Démocratique de Travail of Labour, the Democratic Federation of Labour. So it's so it's set up by the Socialist Party. So it's always been mainstream social democratic, but of course it depends. Also, like in Britain, it depends very much on the strength of people locally. And what I discovered very quickly was that we only have there's 32 people on the Works Council out of we've about 500 people, just over 500 people work. A majority of those people on the Works Council are administrators, several number of cadre, but they're mostly administrators, and only 3 of the representatives. But only 12 representatives are teachers, right? So out of a representative committee of 32 people, only 12 are from the lecturing staff. So you can imagine whose interests are, whose interests are put to the fore now. So so what I discovered very quickly was actually that was in a sense less effective than the UCU, University College Union lecturers, was in Strathclyde University, where I worked for 11 years. In fact, it was actually completely ineffectual. So when the institution wanted to set up a campus in Paris, they simply announced to CSA that, we've invested 13 million euros at a campus in Paris. Yeah. And people at the Works Council were saying, this seems like trivial. I'm just going to say this because of what's happened subsequently in the last 4 weeks. So people say, what kind of, what are you going to, is this going to be a green campus? Or are we going to, yes, people, there's going to be green, there's going to be grass on the roof. It's by Canal Saint-Martin. And so it's very lovely. And, is there a cafe in it? Yes. And I thought, what's going on here? Because although I'd already been in jail for 3 years at the Works Council, every week, I got really frustrated. I wanted to talk to the CFDT rep, and she said to me, well, you don't need to be. It's all right. You don't need to be. This myself, and I won't mention the other colleague, we'll look after everything. I thought, no, I don't think so. But I could never get into, of course, I'm not part of the French tradition, so cultural traditions, so, social, ideological background is very different. So, I couldn't quite get into working out how to work, but it was quite clear as an outsider that, it was very based on making things work for the employers, basically massaging things through that would be difficult, not creating difficulties, and simply rubber stamping everything that came along. That was okay, but not okay. But I could understand that to some degree. But what I couldn't understand was there's never any attempt to talk to people in departmental meetings about what was going on. And I thought even in Strathclyde, when things are really shit, you'd always have the UCU rep would come to the department and say, this is what the union's doing, this is what they thank you, okay, nothing would happen, bye bye. But I tried to get. I remember talking to the CSA people, and it was like I'm coming from another planet. The idea that you would go back and talk to the people who elected you about what the CSA was doing, they couldn't cope with it, and so that's all by way of saying. So we Heather and I, but we looked at we looked at the period from 2017 and then through to 2021 COVID period, and tried to focus on how, in the case of, I mean, we looked at the institution here and two institutions in the UK and thought, well, how did they cope with the issue of COVID? We looked at a number of measures, qualitative interviews. We talked to people, interviewed people in both contexts, both staff and union representatives, and then CSC people, and we made it clear to them what we were doing with the talks, we're interviewing them, and what we've discovered, I suppose, the assumption is that in a highly regulated environment, neoliberal, agenda are much more compromised. Actually, we find that it's better, that actually neoliberal environments not only quite happy with the regulated environment, but actually quite comfortable, because it makes things happen in the because what it does is, it not just institutionalizes conflict, but deconflicts situations so that conflict doesn't arise, basically. So it's not that it takes conflict on board and eradicates it, but you never have conflict at all. Of course, there's conflict. People are getting sick and ill and leaving. Unusual in the French system until now, but of course there's conflict, but it's highly personalized, individualized, with high levels of stress. We tried to find out levels of stress, and the head of the place was said, oh yes, there's noise in the corridor, we hear that people aren't, but there's no attempt to really primitive, really unsophisticated understanding of the nature of work and the employment relationship. And so that's so we looked at how, in a sense, industrial issues, employment issues, are, they're incorporated, institutionalized to begin with, so that they never really happen, and conflict kind of disappears. In contrast to the British case, where people are kind of fighting to negotiate with the employer, and then when you do, it's institutionalized in a very different way. And yeah, I mean, I suppose it's both obvious when we said it, but because there is assumption neoliberalism is something that's completely deregulated. But I suppose one of the things we found, which maybe I guess ties in with the case, looking at, there's an interesting paper by Ross and Savage, which we used, which we tried to develop, and they talk about the kind of things we know about, neoliberal personality. And you can see it here so clearly, because people don't identify, or didn't until an event, which I'll talk about in a moment. But it's all about getting on and getting the publications out. And here, I think there's only one university, maybe two in Britain, that do this, because here you get, in the Grand École, you get money for publishing, And sometimes, like if you publish in a journal like Work and Employment Society, I mean, you're talking about 15 grand, euros. I mean, I have some colleagues who earn more in their publishing than they would in their salary. That's not to say the salaries aren't great, but maybe get 50, 60,000 euros a year if they publish. That's exceptional, but so that's kind of driving the motive. And of course, as it kind of goes without saying, very few people can do that, and very few people do. And if we publish anyway, publishing's like that. I mean, but it's a kind of this motivator, and it's in people's heads, this idea you can be this great kind of neoliberal driver of change. It's usual rubbish. And then we found that, well, like in Britain, it was funny because, I mean, for years and years when I was involved in UCU, like you try to get people to go out and strike, and there was all kind of things, abuse, harassment of women colleagues, or you could never get anybody to do, locally you'd have campaigns, and then, in 2017, around pensions, and it's like, why pensions? Because it's people didn't understand their pensions. Why was that the thing that motivated people? I know there's people who've written about this, but here as well, because Heather comes from the British tradition. She's a union activist. She's actually involved with CGT and Labour uh, inspector in Lyon with the CGT as well. So she does a lot of work outside the school. But I mean, so we were thinking, well, this, you know, and then about a month ago, we suddenly get this note. But bear in mind, in the school of 600 people, there's three people in CFTT, there's two people in CGT, and the security guards, and that was it, you know. And then about a month ago, we got a letter from the head of the school to say, uh, you're going to, we've a workload model. It's used in other business schools in France, but anyway, it's sort of, you know, it's the usual thing. It kind of tries to balance, say, this is what you're teaching, this is what your administration is, and all this kind of stuff. I said, okay, so, and for each grade of professor, you know, you have a certain amount of teaching, and said, from next year, everybody's workload is going to increase by, you know, and this is because the school is in 14 million pounds, sorry, 14 million euros, 14 million euros deficit. And if you make all these changes, we'll save 300,000 euros, you know. And of course, faculty were thinking, what, what do you mean? Oh, by the way, they're going to get rid of, this isn't a good thing, but they're going to get rid of all temporary staff. So people say say days, which are contract years into terminate permanent jobs. And there's a lot of people, maybe about 50, 60 people had say days, which are temporary contracts. So the school's going to get rid of all of these people on temporary contracts and load up other people's work. Right. I mean, people generally aren't interested in what happens to people who are temporary lecturers, as you can imagine, just like anywhere else. But they think, shit, I'm going to have all this extra work. Like in another 100 hours would be like 3 courses. So suddenly, bang! So within the space of, it's quite funny in a way, but in the space of 3 weeks, say FTT's gone from 3 people to 27, you know, and so and you know it doesn't happen in France. I mean, I don't actually. In the time I was in UCU, and we never had like you know in a week 27 people join the UCU. That 20, 24 is that 20? Yeah, 24 people join UCU. There was a huge transformation. So this thing about workload increase and affecting people's ability to write the 4-star articles or even write an article at all. And extra teaching was so it completely you know hits head on this idea about you know we can look after you if you do your work properly and all the rest, and there'll be all these rewards in the future. And so what's happened is basically because I don't think even at Strathclyde that would have happened, that would have been able to happen because the union was strong, it was autonomous, it was independent of the employer. And so what we had here is the CSA was completely unprepared for it. It wasn't fit. It was just a bit like a staff association, you know, which is what the British University Union used to be like, lollipop, you know. But here, and also the CFTT, the two people were like going for wine and cheese, do with the head of the, you know, completely on it, just unable to cope with, didn't know what was happening to them. And now we have the department, the CFTT person from the department um, who oversees higher education in these air. You know, he's come to the meetings, and you can see that these two people, like they just like open they can't cope. You know, and he's actually been very critical, saying, like, you know, you have failed in your responsibility. You're supposed to. I mean, he's not saying I'm kind of stylizing, but he's saying, you know, you're supposed to have this. Your role isn't just to say yes to managers, it's actually to challenge them. You know, and all the time they've been saying things like, yes, but we're not like, you know, and they obviously didn't know what to do. Now I'm being critical of them, you know, because I think that's important. But you can see why they didn't have to be engaged in any way politically because you know everything was great before that. People were getting their money for publishing articles with lots of students. All overseas courses were doing well, and suddenly bang that goes. So you get this radicalization. Now we had a letter last Friday because we wrote a letter. There's 160 full-time full professors and 140 signed this letter. So that's like lots of 100. You put your name on. We wrote this carefully worded letter, and so on. And we got a letter from the direction from the management on Friday saying, "Thank you, very good, but fuck off. Thank you very much. Bye bye. This is what we're going to do. This you're going to increase your teaching load by 100. Some people like teaching now 370 hours a year, for God's sake, you know, really. And even people on lower workloads of 100 hours now are going to have 120. So they're saying, thank you, interesting letter, but bye-bye. This is what you're going to do. So it'd be interesting now, and I'll let you both know in the next, we should know in the next week what people are going to do, because I'm thinking probably the only option is to go on strike. And of course, there are hurdles to that and issues around that, but there are things we can do, like we can, you have to, before you go into next year, you have to personally sign off your workload agreement with your head of department. So we're trying to encourage people not to do that. And if even, 25 people, because that would be five, is saying no, it messes the whole thing up. So it depends what happens. I mean, I'm away along the system in my job and career. It's okay for me to not sign it, and there's other people. But even if you have 3 or 4 people in each department who don't sign off their workload agreement, it messes it up. So it'll be interesting. But it just shows in a way, I suppose, how the common things in higher education everywhere, the individualized, the subjectivity, one for all and all for one, especially this one. It's in Britain, it's the same in France as it is in Britain. And funnily enough, the institutionalization of the employment relationship, which is much more structured and rational in France, actually allows the employer to be more bigger bastards than they are other places, because the restraints have been very minimal. So we will see how it develops, but I'm actually not that optimistic, to be frank. But I mean, my view is that probably this school will, because a lot of the French business schools work in mergers with others. In fact, Grenoble is quite unusual for it's relatively small, but they've been getting rid of a lot of their overseas and international courses, a lot of the MSc programs, and to me that smacks of preparing for merger and acquisition or something. I think that's a cheap. It's cheapening labor, um, rationalizing, intensifying labor. The usual things as Marxist I would say. It's and the real as Elena's talked about the real subsumption of labor, we can see at different moments across the different occupational grades here. And it's quite, I think people are beginning to realize, you know, because it's the Grand École, they're very, Ellie knows this, they're very elitist institutions, but you've got people who are suddenly realizing they just like shit workers, like other shit workers. That ultimately, the direction tell if you don't tell them what. But of course, they don't have the money. They're getting rid of all the preem, all the bonus for publishing. And that's going to go, and then get rid of the preem, the extra money for overdoing your work to do more than your workload, and that'll go. So you're getting this, the degradation of labour, deregulating it as well in the local context, making people work harder, working more within their workload and working longer in the work. So extensification of the working day. It's quite difficult for us to measure that in academia, but that's something which is going on. But yeah, don't know
Yeah,
whether that makes sense, but it's quite depressing. At least people struggle,
yeah,
people are starting to fight, which I didn't think would happen. So that's
yeah, this is, I guess, a glimmer of hope. It's pretty remarkable how these narratives of deficits in academia actually happen at the same time when there are huge investments exactly in different technologies and in campuses abroad that actually make it possible to more easily dispose of the workforce. But I noticed something that both of you said, and it's kind of quite remarkable that a lot of the authors in this issue, I guess it's not remarkable, but I think it's worth noting that a lot of the authors in this issue are activists themselves. So this positionality of what does it mean to be an academic worker and do research on academic work. And something that both of you said was about the difficulties of accessing actually the field, despite being an insider, of actually having limited access to the data that you would normally want to gather in order to make of a deep analysis of the dynamics in a particular field. So I wondered whether you want to talk about this, like how
Yeah, I'm happy to
What's it?
talk about it a little bit actually, because Teresa O'Keefe and I are hoping to publish something on that soon. Hopefully, fourth round of reviews. So I think that should be it now. But we're basically looking, examining the ethical dilemma of researching academic precarity in our situations, which is we used to be precarious and we were both precarious for a long time, but we are not now. Well, I mean, if you're permanent in a UK university, you're not always safe. And we know that since like quite a few have closed departments and the rest of it. But still, even in this scenario, it's secure. Those are secure positions. And Teresa is in Ireland in a permanent position. And so we basically had all those ethical dilemmas because it's research we started when we were precarious, when we were organizers of precarious workers, and we are not that now. Okay, I mean, especially me, because I changed countries, so I'm no longer involved in organizing precarious academics in Ireland, and I haven't found anywhere really to do that here in the UK. Not that it's my place anyway, because I know that. I know that, and I think it's an issue you touched upon, Paul, in what you were talking about. It's the divisions within academics, and I think that applies as well in the case of the workers. We would like to examine those in OPMs. It's academics who are in secure positions in the UK and who regularly face those threats of, increase in workloads and, hey, you're going to teach 3 more modules or lose this or that. They see that kind of, those kind of programs staffed by casualized worker as well, as long as the casual workers do it, I don't have to do it. So there's there's a clash of interest there, and even like support for teaching only positions, because okay, those colleagues will will shoulder just the bulk of the teaching, and I can do my research. In fact, it never happens. You can never do research, but never mind that. But there is a clash there. There are conflicting interests, massively so. And that is an issue. And what we actually talk about in that article is the precarity dividend, a bit like the patriarchal dividend. If you're permanent, you benefit from precarity, even if you don't have your own army of research assistants or teaching assistants or the rest of it. Indirectly, you will benefit because you are somewhere in the middle of that pyramid. Okay, or at the top for some people, but usually somewhere in the middle. So you benefit from that, and it's an issue. So yeah, and it's questions that kind of manifested themselves in practical ways as we did the research, as we were conscious about having to be very clear about our positions, about realizing in the earlier interviews that some respondents assumed that we were still precarious. Because we were known as organizers to them, and thinking, oh God, we have to clarify that. Would they have volunteered knowing that we are now on the other side, that we are permanent? So it is a problem. So I mean, and also there's the issue, I think, which is like it's a field of research that is developing, that is quite popular. There are a lot of publications. And we need to think as well, when we do that kind of research, who does it benefit? Well, it benefit us. It's good on our CVs, okay? Good metrics and all that. Does it actually benefit the precarious workers who are still precarious, unlike us, who give us their time, share their stories? Okay, how is it going to benefit them? So yeah, so that's something we hope to again to have published soon. So another point on our CVs, if you like, but it is also, a question. I think it's important to always maintain the link between that research and something that is transformative in some way, and that we can
Definitely.
use to make demands that we can use to change things. At the start, when we started that 10 years ago, it was to create an awareness, but I think now the awareness is there, you know. So in the context of Ireland anyway, so what do we do next? How do we move things forward? How do we keep agitating around those issues? How do we push for change and not just continue publishing papers?
I've nothing to add to Eileen's, but yeah, point time. I'm so when you talk about it, just again think about the difference between in France, you know, because well in Britain, you know, originally it was very unusual to get a permanent job. But the idea was, I mean, when I started working, you know, had a temporary job, and then it was almost expected after a year you get a permanent one. Everybody I knew that stayed in academia, they all got permanent. You know, it was kind of part of the career ladder in a way. People did have permanent jobs, and here eventually, but then when I went to Strathclyde, it was only about 5% of people were in temporary contracts. I remember because we were doing the figures for the union at the time back in 2007, you know, 5%, you know, now it's, well, it must be 40%, I would imagine. I mean, here in Grenoble, it's interesting because, you know, it wasn't I don't really actually, to be honest with you, I don't know how the career ladder works here, and it's different. Obviously, the public universities where people are sort of civil servants, I guess it's a different environment again. But here, in the Grande École, you know, both here, law, engineering, medicine, which is where most of those disciplines are taught. The You know, a lot of people had temporary contracts, but they were framed by labour legislation, so they're protected in a way. People knew what they're doing, and so you wouldn't. There wasn't a so far as I know, in the sector, there wasn't a campaign around their activity or their work. And then, but basically what they did was here now. So it means basically getting rid of all. You know, there's a pressure on money, so they just get rid of that category completely. You know, it's not as if they're making. You know, because I suppose in the UK or here, would it be nice to say, well, most people in temporary contracts would be nice if they got permanent jobs. You know, but now that's gone because they just get rid of that category completely in the school. But they're putting all the extra work onto the permanent staff. So this
But
is
the yeah,
sorry,
in
I
France, the vacataires are not they don't have any workers' rights in France, do they? I don't know if
no,
you have them in
no, no,
in
no. You're right. They don't. You're right. You're absolutely right.
they
You're
have
absolutely right.
nothing. I
So
was
even yeah,
yeah, they have no sick pay, they have
yeah,
no they can be paid under minimum wage because it's a very low hourly rate. There's absolutely no security. They get paid sometimes months,
yeah, yeah. So that's the crazy
years
thing. You
later.
know, we're not even getting
Yeah.
into getting them rights, let alone getting them secure work. You know what I mean? So it's starting
Mhm.
right back. You know, so the institutionalization can mask. It looks good, you know, but how's it being protected? What are the protections? And yeah, so
And who
yeah,
benefits? Yeah.
yeah. In this case,
Who's
the
left
employer. But
out?
I think the mistake, the tactical mistake the employer is making here is to say how much money would be saved. They say made a mistake by saying there's 14 million euros in deficit, and if you do this, it will save 300,000. People saying, where's 300? Where does that come from? And if you're 14 million euros in deficit now, there 300,000 isn't going to help anything next year because they're saying, of course, next year will be different. And even people like me who can't count very well, saying, well, hang on a minute, like by 300,000 next year is going to be 300,000 again because of inflation and because so it's bullshit. You know, so even if the arguments employer was making made sense, people can say, well, it can't make sense, but they know it's bullshit and it's not going to save anything. So people are unhappy because they don't understand the argument. You know, the employer's not been very clever in that way. But no, yeah. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
a really important point that actually Amy um Amy Armano, Andrea Cavazzini, and Rosanna Macaron, the Italian the Italian group in the special issue, they are actually talking about the importance of approaching research as a workers' inquiry. So thinking of it
good.
in terms of in terms of mobilizing and getting this knowledge with the strategy of actually using it to change the conditions of labor, which I guess is a really important point to make. But thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
So that was an excellent conversation.
Eileen, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.